Prospect Village is one of the many coastal communities along the east coast of Nova Scotia threatened by rising sea level, increased storm activity, and degrading infrastructure that threatens to disconnect a community that has been there since 1750. It's not difficult to see the ill effects that sea level rise is having on our coastal communities. Every day, we watch as the media outlets illustrate the daunting reality of sea level rise around the world. What was once thought to be reversible has turned into something seemingly unstoppable. Located 22 kilometers outside of Halifax, Nova Scotia, on the western shores of the Chebucto Peninsula, Prospect Village has served to be an important political, economic, and religious center over the last 260 years. Settled in 1750, Prospect Village had a humble beginning. Throughout the early 1900s, Prospect Village was known to be one of the biggest commercial fisheries on the eastern seaboard. Today, very little remains of this era, and what's left is in constant state of repair. Now, the coastal villages and communities of Nova Scotia are threatened by elevated sea levels, increased storm activity, and degrading infrastructure that, in this case, threatens to cut off an entire community. Every year, records are broken from extreme heats, extreme colds, and severe storm surges that cause damage to the frail and outdated infrastructure of Prospect Village and other coastal communities in Nova Scotia. In a time of more severe storm surges, inevitable sea level rise, and continued neglect by our governments, Prospect Village faces an uphill battle when thinking about its future. Is there any chance that communities like Prospect Village will disappear into the future? The fisheries that once thrived in Prospect Village have since dried up, and the fish drying racks have disappeared. Only one Class II lobster license exists today in Prospect Village, and it will expire with its holder. Prospect Village is under threat of losing everything, from roads, bridges, electrical infrastructure, its population, and the very foundation their houses sit on. Their stories paint a picture of individuals who work to maintain their community. We took some time to sit down with Jim Lindsay, a local artist, photographer, writer, a resident of Prospect Village, to hear firsthand about how his community has changed and what he has seen happen to his home over his lifetime.
My neighbor, the first person to tell me stories, Victor Kiley. He lived on that side. He's gone. He used to tell me stories dating back, 50, 60 years of how he grew up. And he kept fishing till he was over 80. And the year he couldn't fish any longer, he died. He wasn't a person to stay in bed or go to a rest home. Just down the lane here, Ronnie Duggan, who was a fisherman at the end of his life, but had also been a detective in Halifax, and a very good friend of mine who helped me learn the ways of the water around here. He died just 2 or 3 years ago. Weldon Coolin, who lived just across there. You can see the boathouse on the dock right there. It never looked that good while Weldon was alive. He just built what he could build by himself, and it was a spindly thing, but he went out all the time. Even when he was way up in his 80s, every morning, he would go out. Because I would see him, because I'd be getting up for breakfast. He'd be coming back from fishing, getting up on his dock and cleaning the fish. And I considered them like the old guard. They made this place a fishing community. It's scarcely a fishing community now.
Prospect Village is eroding in front of our eyes, and the question persists: do you continue to resist and endure, or face the difficulty and plan? It's logical to conclude that in the future, rising sea levels will inevitably deteriorate and destroy some of the infrastructure of Prospect Village, and extreme climate events are effectively destroying the rest. We can see here that during these climate events, that the high water mark actively intrudes on and over the streets and floods the bridges, yards, basements, and cisterns that locals rely on. Even though it's a small community, the residents of Prospect Village have a great deal of infrastructure they rely on. Power poles, roads, and bridges, to name a few, serve as the lifeline to these communities and should be adjusted to facilitate sea level rise and extreme weather events. Private infrastructure comes at a premium in these small communities. We can see here that although the population may be small, the infrastructure needed to facilitate the community's existence is immense. Because of its coastal location, drilling wells for water is virtually impossible, so residents rely on cisterns for grey water and bottled or filtration systems for potable water. The majority of homes in Prospect Village are less than efficient and lack some of the efficiencies of modern residences. Old windows, outdated wiring, poor foundations, and less than ideal insulation are some of the things residents in the small village deal with. Prospect Village is home to just over 100 residents. This small community survives by their connection to Halifax, Nova Scotia, only a 30-minute drive away. Residents generally commute to work via personal vehicles and rely on the bridge and road network to re-enter their coastal community. It's unclear where the lack of incentive comes from in the preservation of these small communities. Political indifference for a low tax base creates a less than ideal return on investment for infrastructure projects in small communities. Why does it seem like there is such a disinterest in rural communities by the municipality, provincial, or federal governments? Does it stem from the incentive to densify the inner city and save money on municipal services, or should we plan for these communities? Why have coastal communities been neglected to this extent by government? Is there any plan to turn the tides of sea level rise? Or are there any plans that signify the interest of the municipality in dealing with some of these issues? It's unclear whether or not municipalities like the Halifax Regional Municipality will take steps to help improve the sustainability of these communities. We are beginning to see the implementation of some municipal plans and strategies like Halifax and the Halifax Regional Municipal Planning Strategy that outline future growth nodes with future municipal service boundaries. But they fail to create a sense of belonging for small communities like Prospect Village to the greater body of HRM. If communities on the fringe of municipal boundaries are going to continue to support their residents, it will be important in the future to continue and monitor sensitive infrastructure along our coastal communities.
Well, if you knew what the heyday was over a long time ago. I mean, this looks like a little quiet village now, but it used to be such a center of fishing. You see all this space, and the harbor is contained by buffer islands. So actually, the entrance to the harbor is very small. You got to know where to go. But every bit of that now, and you see it's just mostly space with just a couple of structures along it. In the heyday of Prospect, that was so jammed with boathouses and fisheries that there was no space in between them. They completely lined everything. That was the heyday.
How do we do this? The community of Peggy's Cove represents a large tourist destination and home to 32 year-round residents and personifies coastal living in Nova Scotia. The Peggy's Cove Commission Act, passed in 1962, prohibits development in and around the surrounding village and restricts development within Peggy's Cove. The Commission makes planning and development decisions according to the land use bylaws for the Peggy's Cove Preservation Area and helps to preserve the unique scenic beauty, character, and integrity of Peggy's Cove. The individuals who make up the Commission are experienced experts of this unique area and will strike a balance between preserving our heritage and creating a welcoming place for residents and visitors alike. Moving forward, Prospect Village may benefit from a Peggy's Cove-style act or plan, which creates policies and bylaws that can dictate how future redevelopment and new development happens within the boundary of Prospect Village. This could even lead to an economic upswing, leading to higher values on homes, as well as an increase in government awareness and funding to spend on community and infrastructure improvements. Since 1750, Prospect Village has seen its landscape diversify into something that struggles to sustain itself. The fishing community of the 1900s is gone, and those who remain need to travel back and forth to Halifax to survive. The infrastructure in Prospect Village is beginning to show signs of degradation and will soon need to be repaired and replaced. Coastal communities like Prospect Village are a good example of what happens when municipalities are put in this position, where the tax revenue doesn't cover general maintenance in the community. This poses a huge problem with the inevitable of sea level rise and worsening climate events. It's unclear what the future will hold for Prospect Village, but in the future, adjusting infrastructure to facilitate higher tides, creating alternative solutions to greywater catchment, enhanced bridges, and involving the community in the decision-making process will enhance buy-in from residents and make these changes possible. All is not lost as far as coastal living goes in Nova Scotia. Sustaining a future in these communities for current and future residents to live, work, and play is achievable.
This book is about a couple, a very large woman and a very small man, Big Bertha and Little Mac, who live in a small village like this. And it's about the difficulties of living on the Granite Coast, and also about how great love will get you through it.